Emanuel, please come back.
Oh, that's what you're saying.
The next person on the list is Jake Reed.
Yeah!
Jake is my student. I want to make a quick explanation about the book he's reading because he asked me to do this. He's reading from Murakami Ryu, a Japanese novelist, his famous novel. And Murakami Ryu is one of the leading Japanese writers today, right up there with Murakami Haruki. No relationship to him. But he's very famous for plumbing the depths of crazy psychology. You know, think of people like Latremont, think of people like Marquis de Sade. But he does this with a very whimsical sense of humor, combines it with the psychology of all kinds of weird things. Pop culture, he's very interested in. So we'll be reading from him, which Jake will tell us a little bit about. Let's take it away. Thank you.
In the Miso Soup by Murakami Ryu, as Dr. Yang just told you.
You actually asked me if you like practice censorship here, so I'm expecting something good.
All right. Having said that, the book, it's really short actually, only 3 chapters, but maybe 200 pages or so. It's about a guy named Frank, who is your really stereotypical overweight American tourist who goes to Japan. And basically, he doesn't know Japanese or anything, so he has to have a tour guide. And the entire book is through the eyes of this tour guide named Kenji, who basically, it's just kind of like his part-time job. He just escorts people around Tokyo and shows them the nightlife. And so this is part of chapter 2 where things kind of get really crazy, because from the very start, he has suspicions about this Frank guy. Whether or not he's like some kind of crazy nutcase, or if he's a murderer or a thief or something. And then you find out in the middle that, of course, he is. You know, they just kind of build the whole thing. And I will read an excerpt from where he kind of reveals himself, which is actually in public, inside of this nightclub bar where they're speaking with some of the women. So, except that, I will begin. Mr. Children still hadn't lost consciousness when Frank left off burning his face and reached over to hike up the skirt of Lady Number 5, whose throat was still leaking blood. The moment Frank lifted her skirt, she slumped against the backrest of the sofa. Her head flopped back over it until all I could see of her face was her nostrils, and then, carried by its own weight, and with a sound like a rusty lock giving way, it flopped even farther. I never would have thought the head could bend all the way back like that. Now the woman looked like the mouth of a vase filled with dark red fluid. I could see the veins and bone and a gooey white stuff, but strangely enough, the blood still wasn't spurting, but only slowly seeping out. Mr. Children was holding his molten nose with his right hand as he sobbed. Tears and sweat dripped from his face, and some fluid matter oozed through his fingers. Frank spread Lady Number 5's legs apart, then ripped her panties and stockings open and waved me over, saying, "Come here, Kenji." I didn't go. I was still sprawled on the floor and literally couldn't have moved to save my life. Frank let go of Mr. Children's hair, strode over to me, and grabbed the collar of my jacket, dragging me across the floor to Number 5's feet. Her body was twitching in various places. Maybe she was still alive. The flesh quivered where her inner thighs met her groin, and her pubic hair bristled as her vagina opened and closed for all the world as if it were breathing. "Kenji, tell this man to have sex with her," Frank whispered in my ear. I shook my head. I'm not sure I could have spoken anyway. "Tell him!" Frank shouted. Along with the fear, I felt an overwhelming repulsion. Frank had the long, thin knife in his right hand and held it up before my eyes. The numbness in my temples intensified, and the nausea that caught in my throat surged up to my back teeth. And when my eyes fell again on Number 5's vagina wriggling like a shellfish, I spewed a cappuccino-colored stream onto the floor. As I puked, I felt my anger rising. I don't think the anger was directed at Frank precisely. It was more of an abstract, absolute sort of anger. "No," I tried to say, but only managed to spill dribbles of vomit from my mouth. I spat out some of the sour, sticky stuff adhering to my tongue and gums and inner cheeks. To do this, though, I had to arch my back and splutter for all I was worth. Frank was looking down at me with obvious amusement. "Better yet, Kenji, why don't you have sex with her?" he said. "Go ahead, fuck her." He pointed at Number 5's vagina with his knife as he said this. I spat once more. It required the concentration of my entire being to get the nerves and muscles to connect and cooperate. But when I saw my spit hit the floor, I felt the welcome return of what seemed like long-lost circuitry. I don't know exactly what it was I'd recovered. My will, maybe? Or maybe just the ability to release tension. Whatever it was, I knew it was something you couldn't do without if you wanted to be in control of your own body. Without it, you were at the mercy of your environment, like some sort of plant. I could feel my voice gathering. No! I tasted flecks of vomit on my tongue as I pronounced the word. I managed to clearly visualize the letter N and the letter O, and to picture myself sounding them out. And lo and behold, out came my voice. I said it again. No! I felt I had to make my will known to this gaijin foreigner. Just expressing something to someone wasn't necessarily the same as communicating. I'd never really realized that before. A while ago, lady number 3 had scraped the microphone over the sofa like an infant having a tantrum, and lady number 5 had begun singing just moments before getting her throat cut. You might say these were signals the women were using to try and express something, but naturally, they failed to get their meaning across to Frank. You can't communicate anything with random signals like that. Before Frank had turned up, this pub was like a symbol of Japan, self-contained, unwilling to interact with the world outside, just communing with itself in every breath. People who spent their lives living in that kind of bubble tend to panic in emergencies, to lose the ability to communicate, and to end up getting killed. No? Frank made a big production of acting as if he couldn't believe his ears. He looked up at the ceiling, spread his arms wide, and shook his head. I don't know why this particular thought occurred to me at a time like this, but I thought, yeah, he's an American, all right. The Americans, like the Spanish, massacred millions of Indians, but I don't think it was out of malevolence so much as plain old ignorance. And sometimes ignorance is even harder to deal with than deliberate evil. What did you say, Kenji? No? That's what it sounded like to me. Is that what you said? No? Frank was slowly wagging the knife in front of my face. I was at his feet on my hands and knees. When you're in a groveling posture, groveling words are the only sort that come to mind. I wanted to change positions, but couldn't very well move with that knife in my face. No! I said yet again, still on all fours. The smile on Frank's face sagged into a sorrowful frown. Kenji, you don't understand. He swung the knife back toward lady number 5's vagina. It looked to me as if he was winding up before sticking it in. I thought, I'm done for. You don't know how good it feels to have sex with a woman who's dying, or who's just died. It's the ultimate experience, Kenji. The brain's dead, so they can't resist, but the pussy's still alive. There was something very mechanical and sing-songy about the way he was speaking, like a bad actor reciting lines he'd learned years ago to see if he can still remember them. A white thread was entangled in lady number 5's pubic hair, and I suddenly realized it was the string of a tampon. I'd never actually seen that before. Well, she wouldn't be needing tampons anymore. That frayed white string seemed to symbolize a life cut short. Lady number 5 was fair-skinned, but the flesh around her vagina was turning pinkish-gray. Kenji, you disappoint me. Frank turned and placed the long blade of his knife behind Mr. Children's right ear, then sliced downward, lopping it off. The man had been sitting with his face in his hands, and his right thumb fell away with the ear. His cries didn't get any louder as a result. To be frightened, to weep, to feel pain, those things require energy, and Mr. Children didn't have any left. Frank sighed as though bored, and cut off his other ear as well. They fell to the floor soundlessly, like a slice of fish cake or something, and lay there among the loose strands of hair and cigarette ashes. All right, Kenji, Frank said. You don't have to have sex with her. But how about picking up that ear and sticking it in her pussy? You can do that much, can't you? He said this quietly, sounding almost despondent now. Ever crammed an ear into a pussy before? He asked me. I didn't answer. His face was expressionless as he put the knife down on the sofa, plucked the dust-covered ear off the floor, folded it, and tried to insert it into lady number 5's vagina. He didn't seem to realize she was wearing a tampon. He had about half of the ear buried inside her, but was meeting resistance. I called to him. He pushed harder. Frank, hey, Frank. I rose to a crouch. It was that time of the month for her. She's wearing a tampon. Frank peered at me, then nodded and removed the ear. He curled the string around one finger and tugged. When the little cylinder, swollen and pink, slid out to dangle at the end of the string, a thick ooze of blood followed and soaked darkly into the sofa between the legs. Frank stared at that little pool of blood for a long time, as though mesmerized by it. While he was doing this, Mr. Children went, ooh, and made as if to stand up. He wasn't trying to escape. It was more like he'd suddenly reawakened from the pain where his ears and nose had been. Frank snapped out of his reverie and turned to him, still dangling the tampon from his right hand and holding the ear in his left. He took the man in his arms as if embracing a lover and broke his neck. I heard a dry crack, like a dead branch breaking, and with his head twisted at the now familiar angle, Mr. Children plopped back down on the sofa. It was murder with all the drama of picking up a fallen hat and replacing it on a rack. Frank looked at me, dropped the tampon, and retrieved the knife. He wore a petulant expression as he stepped towards me, like a small child who's tired of playing. The pointed end of the knife was closing in on my throat when my mobile phone rang. I scrambled to push the blinking green button. Frank hesitated for a moment, then brought the knife closer to my throat. Jun? Yeah, it's Kenji. I'm in Kabuki-cho with Frank. Jun is Kenji's girlfriend. I rattled this off in English in a loud